Good morning, everyone, and welcome to another LogiSYM webinar. My name is Joe Lombardo. I'm the LogiSYM Editor-in-Chief of the magazine. And joining me also today, my co-host is Dr. Ramon Krishna, who is the President of the Logistics and Supply Chain Management Society. Our topic today is e-commerce. How does e-commerce transform today's supply chain? And joining us, our guest panelists are from Siva Logistics. We have Elaine Lowe, the Regional Managing Director for Southeast Asia and Pacific, and Mr. Axel Herzhauser, the Regional Business Development Leader. Welcome to you both. It's a pleasure to have you on.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Excellent. So let's get started. Let me start with Elaine. Elaine, could you share with us a little bit about your background experience? I know you've been in the industry for many years and you've seen a lot of transformation going on, but give us a little bit about your background experience and what are the achievements that you have attained to date.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, Joe, and everyone else.
Good morning.
Thank you for inviting us this morning. Obviously, as introduced, my name is Elaine Lowe. Been with the company for 17 years now, and is the Regional Managing Director for Southeast Asia and Pacific region. Been in the industry for over 25 years, so been a long time. And yes, there have been many, many changes in the industry. And happy to be here to share some of the experiences.
Axel, what about you? I know you've joined the company also several years. Maybe you want to share with us your background, experience, and achievements.
Absolutely. So my name is Axel Herzhauser. I'm the Regional Head of Business Development for Siva here in Southeast Asia and Pacific. I've been with the company, it's actually my 8th year right now. I was previously with the company based out of Hong Kong, looking after Hong Kong, South China, and Taiwan at the time, and then joined Siva here in Singapore in 2018 to look after business development in the region. Been in the industry for almost 20 years, initially from Germany, but then after that in Asia for a rather long time.
Excellent. Okay, so Elaine, we are all challenged tremendously these days. In particular, recently we've had the COVID disruption and many paradigm shifts are evolving in front of us. What are the challenges facing your organization in general today?
Well, clearly the modes of transportation in the marketplace have been greatly affected because of the pandemic. So if you look at the situation, you have, first of all, the air freight capacities been cut, obviously, as known in the market, and that has a significant impact. Over 70% of the capacity is gone, and this slowly coming back, but not to the extent. I would say there's still 60–70% that is a big concern. So obviously, if you look at the ocean side, the shipping lines, you see a lot of blank sailings from the beginning of the year till now. They're slowly putting back the sailings, but still, not to 100% of the capacity. If you look at the border restrictions, I think there is obviously a big impact to logistics. And we continue to see a lot of new requirements and procedures coming on. And the last thing is on the warehousing side. I think there is also an increased capacity in terms of the demand, and that has an impact. However, because of the border restrictions, you also have, in some places, shortage of blue-collar workers. For example, the Singapore and Malaysia, restrictions, and that has brought about many challenges for everybody in the marketplace, not just Siva.
Elaine, can I ask a couple of follow-up questions? Because you said clearly the capacity now is reduced tremendously on the air freight side to 70%, but gradually growing up, and sea freight, a lot of blank sailings. What has been the impact on pricing because of this tremendous shift in capacity availability?
Tremendous impact. So, pricing works aligning to demand and supply. So when the demand outweighs the supply, there is obviously a shift of pricing, upwards as a trend. Right. And the volatility in the marketplace is specific to air. It's extreme, and you look at a lot of inability to predict a lot of the demand consistently. So that creates a lot of up and downs in the pricing. So it is the trend actually to go up and down in the next couple of months.
Right.
And then all the seasonalities of what you see before in the air freight industry is really gone. So now
Okay.
you have a different cycle and an unpredictable one as you move forward.
Yeah, but the impact on shippers must be tremendous, because obviously many shippers have smaller margins and their cost of freight must be skyrocketing. This is not really sustainable, is it? I mean, what do you think will happen to restore some balance in the pricing?
No, it's not sustainable, but obviously the restoration comes in the form of changing the way you do things. I think that's critical, not necessarily going back to where it was. I think going back to pre-COVID will somewhat be a little bit remote for now.
Right.
But changing the way, changing modes of transportation, relying more on ocean, on ground, etc., and changing the way you do things from the sourcing perspective. And as it relates to the topic of e-commerce, changing, looking at the behavior of customers and really adjusting your supply chain. Okay. I think the change is not about going back to where you were before.
This is where agility really comes into the play, right? Being very flexible and agile in managing your change.
Definitely.
One other point I wanted to pick up on your introduction there was increased capacity of warehousing. Does that mean that we are creating more inventories on shore now? Because of border restrictions, more inventories are coming on shore. Therefore, there's a bigger demand for warehousing. Did I get that correct? Yeah.
Yeah. So certainly.
What's the impact on pricing on that effect? And is that also going up because of shortages, or what is the impact on the dynamic of cost there?
So it's a bit mixed here. So where there is a need to increase inventory, obviously the capacities on warehousing is full, but there is also, the decline in some of the down trading industries. For example, automotive, the demand is not so down. So it kind of there is a
compensating.
Yeah, there is a balancing kind of effect. Obviously, you see the inventory for essential items, food products, F&B going up. And then the other side of the equation, you have the decline. So now it's a question, every country across the region, it's a question of balance.
Right.
And obviously it's not so easy when you talk about warehouse, you don't create the capacity overnight. Yeah? You need to build them, you need to have the infrastructure. So there is a lag time to look at, but definitely trending upwards on the needs on capacity moving forward.
Yeah, so the lean concept of inventory are beginning to be challenged quite a bit. Okay, that's excellent. Thank you very much for the introduction, Elaine.
Thank you.
Okay, so just switching gears a bit, Axel, question for you. We've talked about lack of belly capacity, blank sailings, border restrictions, increase or reduced demand in warehousing, shifting or changing how we do sourcing, fluctuations in freight rates. So as a 3PL, as a logistics provider, how is the industry, how are you addressing to keep up to date with these industry realities? Because I'm sure your customers are coming to you with those sort of, what do we do next? Yes.
Yeah, they really do. So I think reality is COVID-19 until today is still disrupting the supply chains, because we see second or sometimes even a third phase of semi-lockdowns like we've just seen recently, for example, in parts of Australia or even parts of the Philippines, right? I mean, we still have the borders between Singapore and Malaysia locked for people to cross. I mean, air travel is possible under very difficult and complicated circumstances, obviously. Right. So the society talks about the new normal. What does it mean for supply chain? The way we look at it, based on the conversations we have with customers, is that the supply chains will become a lot shorter and they will have to become a lot more resilient, right? So Elaine talked about it. We have a lot of inquiries on short-term storage right now. There are shorter lead times. I think Joe, you mentioned inventory going up, right? So I think the key really is for players like us, we need to be ready and we need to be able to adapt to these changing market market requirements. Just maybe a couple examples that we've been facing, situations we've been facing over the last few months is we had customers coming to us and we had to mount air charters within less than 48 hours, which was something very new. When the borders in late March closed between some Southeast Asian countries and we had our cross-border trucking product, we had goods on the way. We had to react really fast to make sure we don't disrupt our customer supply chain. So what did we do? We, for example, went multimodal. We stopped the truck in Malaysia, put it on a ship and brought it into Singapore, even though the distance was fairly short. So being ready, being able to move quickly, I think is absolutely key for the industry to support and sustain the supply chain of its customers.
Okay.
Well, here's a question for you, Axel, just as a follow-on, because we do have a question in the chat. This air charter service, is it a regular thing or is it only an inducement that Siva has for its customers?
It's mainly ad hoc, right? So I think it really depends. I think we had a few moments where we had some regular charters because the capacities were down, as Elaine mentioned earlier. But I think in general, I think these kind of like quick response charters that we had, the 48 hours that we had to mount a charter, were mainly ad hoc requests because of the urgency, and to a large extent, it was linked to COVID-19 relief cargo.
All right, cool, thanks.
Excellent. So our topic is about e-commerce. How is e-commerce transforming our supply chain today? So I'd like to turn now to look at what the customers, what's changing in our customer base and our industry. So Elaine, clearly you've highlighted some of the challenges that we have, that you have at Siva and in the industry generally, but how are you adapting to the high demand in the e-commerce sector? Because this is an area that is exploding now and is creating a lot of interesting dynamics. Maybe give us a take on the customer and in industry changing face.
I think the topic it's a good one, but it's also very wide. Yeah. So you've seen, so for us, we've seen a lot of changes in the e-commerce space, in particular to the consumer behavior changing. So obviously there's a lot of demand, but the demand is changing. It's not the same. So previously, you know, maybe for example, people are used to buying more higher end luxury products. But these days, when you see the e-commerce demand, they're coming in the form of very basic essential items, right? And I think the quantities per order size has increased as well. And you see a lot of that coming, hence there is a need to support these. Now, the other aspect is also the number of channels, omni-channel retailers have increased. Because of the lockdown situations, a lot of the brick and mortar options are no longer there. So people can buy the products going to the mall, etc. And now retailers are looking at many options. So that kind of complicates logistics, obviously. So we have to face multiple channels of retailers and channels to be able to support their logistics deliveries, etc. So these two to me are critical. Yes, over generally the demand has gone up, but it's in a different shape and size.
Interesting. So Axel, as a business development leader, how do you see this demand sustaining long term? Or are we going to see another round of changes evolving around this platform that Elaine has just described? And I think you've got a slide on this somewhere, right?
Yes, we do have a slide for this actually. So COVID was and still is clearly an accelerator for the e-commerce spectrum, right? And we see the trend going nowhere else but up, right? So I think what initially we saw Generation Z and the millennials that kickstarted the e-commerce developments. I think this has really changed throughout COVID-19, because what we see today is not just the youngsters buying online, but we see all age groups buying, right? We see when I go through Singapore, I would see even the senior citizens basically having a smartphone nowadays, basically making use of them to get through access points, and we see trends clearly that this will also have this generation basically going online, buying online. So I think that comfort level in that generation has gone up, and that stimulates significant growth in e-commerce. This will obviously affect operations and supply chains of businesses across many verticals, mainly the retail vertical. But what we can see here clearly on the slide, right? So 68% of all the consumers say that they're likely to buy essential goods even after COVID-19. And I'm sure if we would have the same conversation again in 3 months, that number would probably go up.
Right. Okay. So moving on from what also Elaine just mentioned a little while ago, the consumer profile is changing. We are moving from high value or selected purchases now to basic consumer demand. So how are the customer expectations changing here, Axel? And you know, in this new market that we are seeing, is this sustainable? Is this something that's going to be the new norm? Or again, do we see customers just using this as a temporary leverage to get past some of the restrictions?
Well, I think there are various aspects that we need to look at, right? There's a lot of changes in customer expectation. When the crisis got serious, right, we consumers were concerned about long-term availability, not only of essential goods but also regular consumer goods. So I think we all remember the panic buying modes that we've seen in a lot of the countries. And Joe, you mentioned it earlier. All of a sudden, being lean was not important anymore, and we received inquiries from customers looking into building buffer stock, building more inventory rather than less. So it was really within weeks the strategy changed, because people had to provide more supply, and the demand was significantly higher as they had anticipated.
Right.
Now, for some companies, also their transportation networks appeared not to be robust enough. Many companies had only one, I would say, last mile delivery provider. And with the high demand, we saw lead times increasing. Deliveries were sometimes not available for days. And hence, a lot of customers looked into a multi-carrier solution as part of their contingency planning.
Right.
One thing that we clearly see today, and that we didn't see probably at the beginning of the year, that we have entered a contactless environment. It's another trend that will follow us over the next few months and weeks. QR codes are really part of our lives today, although QR codes are nothing new. But we see solutions being built as we speak that would be included in the technologies that we use today to make sure this contactless environment will continue, because obviously it's a concern in the society amongst the people, and hence the market needs to respond accordingly.
Right. Elaine, with all these changes going on, with all these new dynamics and new paradigms shifting before our eyes, how is your organization resetting the new priorities? Where are you now focusing in terms of, okay, there's infrastructure, there's the solution, there's IT, there's transportation, there's warehousing. Where are your new sites taking you as an organization?
Well, clearly it has an impact to the organization. I think everyone would see that impact. So what we have done is, we've done a lot of things. Actually, we've taken the choice of using the period to realign our organization, making it a lot leaner and a lot more agile. So there are some structural organization changes, but internally, more so for the people, we are getting a lot more trainings into the system, and getting people more attuned to what's happening in the marketplace, but also training the skill sets of our people. And the other part is also to get on board quickly a lot of the technological changes that we need. For example, you know, the Siva platforms. We are actually investing in more technology during this period, because we know that once we pass this period, the needs will increase. And then we'll talk a little bit more about the omni-channel matrix solution, but that's another one on the table that we are actually pushing and speeding up on trying to implement it across the globe. And that's what we have been trying to organize ourselves with.
Okay, I'll come back to a couple of more points that you just highlighted of your organizational challenges, but let me now turn to how Siva is positioning itself in this rapidly reset mode, and what does this mean for the organization? So actually, if I can ask you, as the business development leader, what solutions do Siva offer to ease the challenges that customers are facing today? And I think this is the big question that everybody's asking ourselves: where are we going? So how's Siva addressing this? And I think also here you've got a very interesting slide to share with us.
Yeah, so we have e-commerce related solutions across all our business lines: air, ocean, ground, and contract logistics. Obviously, when people think about e-commerce supply chains, they think really in the first place of last mile delivery, which is only one component in the e-commerce supply chain. Obviously an extremely important, if not one of the most important components. But we have basically three pillars standing in our e-commerce solutions today. One is e-commerce warehousing and omni-channel solutions. We highlighted it earlier. The other one is cross-border e-commerce, where we connect manufacturers with the consumers through air, ground, and our ocean solutions. So it really depends on the lead time that we have. I think we sometimes have customers accepting lead times as much as 2 to 3 weeks for an e-commerce delivery, because it's not urgent. Hence, I would say a more economical solution on ocean would be used, for example. Others can't wait and they need it within less than 48 hours. That's where obviously an air express solution would be used. Now, on last mile delivery, like everyone else, we rely on very strong partners within our local networks, and we have the capability to integrate these partners into our systems and processes. One factor that I want to highlight is sustainability, right? I think there's a few questions that have come up in the media over the last few weeks. Is e-commerce really impacting sustainability? One of the things that we've done earlier in the year, we have invested into an electric vehicle concept in Singapore. I think you can probably, if you're in Singapore, see a Siva vehicle coming around that's actually designed for e-commerce last mile deliveries. Not only that, we use it equally, I would say, for some of our other industries, but we have that flexibility, and we see moving forward in the future more investments going into that direction.
Right. Actually, we have spoken a lot about this, and I can see that you're doing a lot at Siva, and some of the comments you've made, you and Elaine have made, are very clearly that you are active, you're very active. But the question I ask is, will these solutions and these new adaptations force increase in costs, and can the consumer sustain this, or are you also finding ways to be more productive and more efficient in the way you're working?
I wouldn't call it an increase in cost, Joe, but it's more an increase in investment, right? I think any investment that we would make, or any company in the industry would make, obviously benefits its customers. But I think when you make an investment, obviously, ideally, you want to get a long-term commitment from a customer. I think that's just normal. However, we need to be very mindful that not all the companies in the market out there have the capability to give you a 3, 5, or 10-year commitment overall. Some of them don't really have the visibility on where their e-commerce business is going to take them 6 months down the road. So we have designed solutions that we have in place. I think I'll talk about it later. It's a solution called Red that we have in Australia, where we can actually offer this to medium-sized companies with very small investments and very low startup costs, basically, to implement an e-commerce solution and then develop it and integrate it over time. Yeah. Ideally, we want to, of course, leverage all the investments across multiple customers to achieve the maximum cost-benefit ratio, but I guess that applies to all the companies that are in the industry.
Actually, you make a very good point about being an investment rather than the cost, and basically adding value to your offering. But again, you also mentioned customer loyalty or customer long-term commitment. And unfortunately today, the cycle of commitment is very short. And whether you like it or not, you may have 20% of your customers are long-term loyal, 80% of your customers are dynamic. How do you meet this challenge? Because clearly everyone is shopping around for the best value, the best cost. How do you address this yourself? And I know this is a challenge because I've experienced it myself.
No, and I think it's a very good question, but obviously I think what we want to do is we want to consolidate. We want to leverage, basically, on the contract logistics side, we ideally want to bring various customers under one roof, where we can basically make use of the same labor, same systems, have similar processes in place, and then provide the customer these benefits, right? Ideally, we would like to grow with all these customers and make sure they will become multinational or large customers with us. But I think that's one area that we need to look into. I think performance on the one hand side, and I think also meeting the customer requirements, I think is a key area in order to make a customer loyal. I think it's like in any other business, it's the same for us.
Elaine, your challenges get bigger and bigger by the day. Everyone now is running after technology. Everyone's running after innovative solutions. What is Siva doing differently to its competitors in the same or similar space to stay ahead and maintain this market share or even increase your market share?
Well, first of all, I think we recognize ourselves as a global player, not so much as a local player. So we remain very competitive as a network player. And you can see in the last 6 months, we have actually announced a lot of further investments into our network. And that includes the opening up of other continents like Africa. Right. And that's all in the public space, and reinvesting in making some of the networks wholly owned by Siva. Okay. And the other part that we've done is we are able to replicate a lot of our solutions around the world. Solely because we also have a global IT system. We don't create anything locally. Most of our technology are all global driven, localized in certain aspects, but the platform is similar across, whether you're in Europe, US, or Asia. Right. I think that that's a differentiator for us. And obviously the last differentiator is having people with good skill sets, I think is important. So we actually spent quite a lot of time during the last 6 months focusing on having the right recruitment. Obviously we need to continue to hire some positions, but focusing on hiring the right people.
Excellent. Thank you for that. Now, before we open the webinar to questions from the audience, I'd like to just ask Axel to share with us maybe some of your success stories, something that you can share with us and our audience, and then we'll open it to the questions from the audience. And I believe that you've got also another slide on this one, Axel.
Yeah, so we have a number of interesting cases and existing operations on this in place in the region. I think just recently we were awarded the last mile delivery distribution for a DIY retailer in Thailand. We had one of our long-term customer who's been with us for more than 10 years in the Philippines. Actually, it's a consumer electronic brand where we are now. Where we started to do omni-channel fulfillment for anything that goes into their e-commerce channel. It's a brand that traditionally was very much into the retail space, but then in the current situation, this obviously has changed. In Malaysia, we run various omni-channel operations for large consumer brands. One thing that I want to highlight is the RED model that we have developed in Australia. RED, R-E-D, stands for Rapid E-commerce Deployment. And it is really a model where we have selected a few of our facilities in Australia, and they have been e-commerce optimized with systems. Obviously, the location plays a role, where we actually allow medium-sized companies or companies that don't have an e-commerce strategy in place to come in, and we can onboard them quickly within weeks rather than months, right? So, for example, we had one customer, it's a famous sunglass brand, that once they were facing the situation of a lockdown, retail shops obviously closed, they had to rethink their sales model quickly, and then needed an e-commerce solution that we deployed, I think, within 3 weeks.
Right. Okay, that's great. Okay, I think thanks for that very interesting discussion for the moment. Let's now open it to the questions. So I pass it back to Ramon now. I think there's many questions are coming through from the audience.
Yeah, we've got some really great interaction today. And I'll start with one of the first few that we got. I think that the person asking the question was being a bit Machiavellian, Axel and Elaine, which I think is interesting. Yeah, but you know, it comes back to what we were talking about earlier: volatility and capacity and price, demand and supply. Isn't this a good thing for freight forwarders? You know, non-asset owners decrease in volume, but increase in revenue. You compare to what we're seeing, say today, compared to say the last downturn where a lot of carriers go bust, etc., etc. We're seeing carriers reporting quite good earnings this quarter for this period. So is this a good thing for a logistics company?
We need to recognize when you're a non-asset player, you rely on assets, and the assets have been cut tremendously, as you can see. And I refer specifically to the air capacities, because the passenger capacities have been taken out in the market. So there is obviously an opportunity, and carriers, airlines are suffering, as all of you are fully aware. So there is a concern there, and obviously the cost has gone up tremendously from an airline perspective. And a lot of that cost passed back to service providers like us. And I guess the revenue has gone up to a certain extent because you have a lot of ad hoc business that is not your regular business, but you live in this volatility. However, the cost has gone up tremendously, that outweighs the revenue increase. And I think it's transparent in the marketplace that everyone is feeling and seeing the same thing. To a certain extent, we have to pass some of that back to our customers, and where we can optimize, we would, but there is very, very little chance for us to move forward without the support of the asset owners, for sure.
Okay, yeah, makes sense. Thanks for that, Elaine. Maybe this one for you, Axel. How is the Asian e-commerce merchants and e-platforms adjusting to road freight, railways for long-haul transcontinental, example from Asia to Europe, or even within ASEAN? Because especially when there's vessels taken offline, blank sailings, and no belly capacity, what are we doing around long-haul transcontinental and long-haul road freight and rail freight?
obviously multimodal is the solution that we would have, right? Basically, making use of various modes of transport is the ultimate key, basically, to get around bottlenecks, right? And you need to integrate air, ocean, and ground, right? We had scenarios where we trucked cargo from Southeast Asia into Shanghai, from there to catch a fast boat to go to North America, really to cut out lead time in the supply chain, where customers are also coming back looking for ways to reduce cost and obviously rethinking whether it's really necessary to move all the volumes via air freight, but what alternative options would they have? I think the rail option into Europe is definitely an option that we also can make use of out of Southeast Asia. But one thing
that's something that Siva offers.
That's something that we offer. Absolutely, we have a clear solution in place that goes from Chengdu in central China all the way into Germany. But what we also have, I think, as part of our cross-border ground product, we even truck from Southeast Asia via China into Europe. Yes. Since right now China has ratified the TIR group, is part of the TIR group, so meaning bonded transfers can be made from China all the way into the European Union, which makes it a lot easier. Wasn't possible 5 years ago, obviously a niche product, but we've been doing it, and we've actually had a few successful cases also out of Southeast Asia via China to be trucked into Europe.
All right. Well, last question before I hand you back to Joe. We've got a whole bunch of them, but one's asking about how is Siva embracing digitalization, and you've already answered that. I think both of you have, and I'm sure you're going to talk about it some more. But here's another question. E-commerce customer satisfaction and loyalty are affected heavily by last mile. And you talked about this customer that's now using you guys in Thailand, right? So, and we know that because that's the guy who turns up at your door and delivers your product to you. So how is Siva managing this sort of tight control over your last mile vendors? Because you probably don't do it all yourself. You probably outsource it as well. And so how do you manage your last mile vendors and your reverse logistics effectively? Share with us.
I think nobody can really manage it all by themselves. Everybody relies on partners. So I think what's absolutely important is the process that you have in place. I think the process is not only the guy walking up the door and ringing the doorbell, handing over the parcel. I think there are security matters involved, right? So we have clear screenings on who will be the drivers. I think there's a clear protocol on who we select. We don't just basically have a trucking company or a delivery company wanting to do business with us. It's a long-standing process in order for us to select this kind of partner. I think they need to be also integrated into our system. I think we need clear visibilities. I think what is very important, customer satisfaction on the e-commerce side relates to tracking, right? I think a lot of the youngsters, they go online, they order something and they want to see when exactly can I have my parcel. I think they're very impatient. People want to have it as quickly as possible. So having a system in place that provides that transparency is very important, but more importantly, I think it is key, and our partners get briefed that, you know, the driver also needs to be nice when he hands it over and not just basically throw the parcel in front of the door.
Indeed. Thanks, Axel.
Okay, so let me move on now to the next part of our discussions about technology. And Elaine, you alluded to the fact that Siva has a very, because of its strategy being global and a network player, your solutions are fairly standard worldwide. They have consistency and have approach. But clearly, is this enough to meet the new customer expectations? And how is Siva deploying the new technologies of Industry 4.0? And how is that going to roll out in the coming months or years?
Yeah, to answer your question, point blank, is clearly not enough, yeah, Joe, because I think the markets are still evolving, right, and there is still so much change in the market. So to play a catch-up game all the time in a constant change mode, it's not enough. So we are doing what we can to speed up what we have, and given the capacity constraints in the marketplace, the demands have increased. We will have to manage to the best of what we can see in terms of the demands. Now in Siva, as Axel mentioned, the omni-channel matrix solution that we have deployed, I think in the name of agility and the name of adaptability, the system platform also has to be a little bit more flexible. Right. So we are now encouraging this platform that allows the connectivity to you know, any one time to 1,000 transportation providers or carriers, so that they can connect to the main platform. And we're trying to integrate it as fast as we can. And it's not complete. I think we just started on a journey to 350 marketplaces globally. So that is the magnitude of what the system can do. Right. And we are starting the process of trying to implement it as fast as we can, and also where the needs are to start. And it has a lot more maturity in Europe today, and in Asia probably more so in Australia, and we're slowly trying to integrate that system into the rest of Asia. Right. And obviously on the automation part that helps on productivity, we will continue, which includes your AGVs and your robots and all of that. But that comes with also the need to recalibrate cost versus returns, etc., and all that. So I think the multiple platforms that we are trying to push and deploy, and the other one more on the freight is the Siva digital platform that you see announced, but right. Not all the trade lanes have that, and we're slowly trying to integrate that into our platform. Right. Main system.
Yeah, thanks, that's great. Axel, you are a frontline man. Obviously, you are dealing with the customers, dealing with the market out there. Everyone's getting good at technology. Everyone's talking big technical words, AI, ML, this, that, and the other. And whilst they're talking about it, not necessarily they're good at it. And I think Siva has got a very interesting approach on the technology side. How do you think this technology will evolve for Siva, and how do you select which parts of the technology are relevant moving forward? Because the Industry 4.0 is a very big scale. It's a huge monster, and you can't do it all by yourself, and you can't do it in a short time. How do you prioritize which part of the technology you are going to select moving forward?
Well, I think it always depends on what the market demands, right? I mean, technology is always a given as long as it works, and as long as it works, it's very often being taken for granted. Obviously, there's people looking at advanced technologies, and I think, as Elaine said, our OC Matrix system is it's not done yet. Obviously, I think we're using it, we're rolling it out, but it will continue.
Can we put a slide back on again? I like that. Can you bring a slide back on, please, on the OC Matrix? Oh, yeah. I'd like if you can elaborate a bit more, because that's a very interesting chart. That and I quite we didn't highlight. Yes, please go ahead.
So today, really, we have the carriers, we have parcel networks, we have freight forwarding companies, and obviously some of our competitors on these platforms even, right? And we have brokerage companies, we have basically the fulfillment part included into this. So ideally, as Siva, we'd like to do the end-to-end supply chain if we can, but obviously there are various players along the supply chain. So we have in that system the flexibility to integrate other players along the supply chain, and I think that's an area that we feel is right. I think that gives us the flexibility in order to fulfill the needs of our customers. Obviously, as Elaine said, we will continue to further build this. I think there will be more applications that come on top of this. But I think technology is one thing, Joe. I think it's really, the technology will not solve your entire problem. It's the people that behind it that really make the difference. And I think we've talked about technology investments, but the people investment is equally important. And we've recently hired subject matter experts and market leaders that come from the e-commerce side that help us, and they lead us basically throughout this process in order to improve and to meet the market demands. We just recently in Singapore hired a few people. We hired a gentleman who helped to build a fully automated warehouse for one of the leading marketplaces here, for example, in his previous life. We have another gentleman who came on board who is has a very strong 3PL, but also a very strong integrator background on e-commerce around last mile deliveries, right? So I think behind every solution you have people, and we should not forget our business is a people business. So I think that's a key criteria, and it's a key differentiator for us as well. Plus, in addition to the technologies that we offer to our clients.
Thank you for that. So I think there are some more questions coming through, Ramon. Can I just hand it over to you to take some of those questions?
Yeah, for sure, Joe. Thanks a lot. And yeah, we've really got a lot of questions. This is a question coming from India. And, you know, we're talking about artificial intelligence, machine learning, robotic process automation, the whole digitalization in supply chain. So the question is this: with the increase in automation and data science, are we going to see layoffs in manpower? Are people going to be made redundant because things are going to be automated? What do you say to that?
I wouldn't think so, actually, because I think people is always something that you would need, right? So I think we would obviously have I would say automation creates different jobs. Obviously, I think there might be a shift in manpower from one area to another, obviously, right? But I don't see us basically facing tremendous or any big layoffs. I think we always try to optimize our workforce. I think that's one critical area. There will be a shift in manpower from one side to another, and we've been seeing this over time, absolutely. Right. But from what we see at the moment, I think people will still be required in order for us to run our business.
And I think good people will always be in demand. Yeah?
That's right.
I think we can all agree with that.
There is, just to add, yeah, there is an important point I made earlier that Siva, we're investing in training and upscaling. And I think that's also one thing you can do, being practical. To be honest, you're not going to have a lot of robots running around. You still have the people. So it's important to look into the opportunity to upskill and train the people as well in different skill sets. And that to us is more important than to invest in more robots.
Okay, thanks, Elaine. Yeah, and very valid point. I mean, we always have to keep on training and upgrading. Yeah, we can't just be complacent as well. It's also on us. So switching gears a bit from talking about racing with the machine to something a bit more in our face. Here's a question. As a shipper, do you recommend that I have a tripartite agreement for air freight, for example, between my forwarder, my airline, and myself for better control? So that means as a shipper, a freight forwarder, and an airline having a tri-party agreement, rather than having that, you know, that was a Chinese wall, right? You very rarely negotiate as a shipper with an airline. So what do you think about that? Should we have tri-party agreements?
To me, some of these trends in the past, it used to be quite popular. If you recall, many years back, there are a lot of tripartite agreements, etc. So as I said, this is a changing world and this is a changed world. So some of the old concepts of bringing back some of these triangle relationships may be possible, but I would be cautioned to look at different markets and apply it to where it's applicable, because there is still no sustainability and no consistency that we see as far as capacity decisions are made by the airlines. And there is a few that are out there looking at long-term charters with customers and service providers, and we are obviously one of them. But there is still a lot of unpredictability on the cost side with the airlines. So I think as much as we are open and bringing some of these concepts back, we need to caution, and it needs to be applicable to specific markets, probably.
Yeah. And maybe it's something I can say, which you probably wouldn't be able to say, but you know, how many shippers are also sophisticated enough to enter into these sort of negotiations with carriers?
Yes.
You know, it's, you know.
Yeah, and you're right. The other part is the unpredictability on the customer side around your forecast and your volumes as well. So if you can't give something consistent, if the airlines can't give you back something consistent, then somewhere in the equation you need to balance out as well. So I think it's equal.
And here's the last question before I hand you off to Joe, and I think it's a good one to actually help wrap up part of this webinar. Yeah. So very simple question. Do we expect to see demand for logistics increase in 2021, 2022 after COVID-19?
We would certainly hope so, right? I think absolutely. I think from a selfishly speaking, we would like to see this, and also I think most of our friendly competitors in the market would like to see this kind of trend. But I think not only is it interesting for our industry, the moment you see the demand going up in logistics, that means you would see the economy going into a recovery mode, right? With the logistics industry heavily relies on the movement of physical goods, on top of now, of course, the information technology that we see, but it's really the actual physical movement from A to B still until today that really drives the industry. So the more demand we have in logistics, the better of a sign it would be from the world economy. So I think it would be in all our favor to see this, frankly speaking.
No, I agree with you 100%. It's just so strange though, yeah? Like in Singapore, we're seeing a recession, but property and COE prices are going up. But as a recession. Anyway, back to you, Joe.
Okay, so listen, on that last comment that Ramon has made, can I ask you, Elaine, about globalization? Because clearly your network is all about globalization, and globalization has been having a very bad name just recently with trade wars, with protectionism, onshoring, reshoring, all of that. What do you see really out there? Is globalization contracting, or is it basically just a rhetoric, political rhetoric going on and business as usual?
It's a very macro question, right? So it's very big, but let me skew down to what I know and what we do best, which is logistics. We see a lot more nearshoring sourcing alternatives. So customers are looking at alternatives within the region instead of relying on a supplier that's somewhere far away in another continent. Right. And that is clearly, you can call it regionalization, but that's right. Clearly a trend that we see. And the options and the alternatives from customers do create opportunities for logistics players like us to go and adapt. If you find a supplier in Vietnam, how you bring your goods over from Vietnam to Singapore. And those are the changes that we see that is apparent that affects us. Okay. So maybe in that form, nearer to your consumer, in terms of buying and seeing that trend coming up as well.
Excellent. Thank you for that comment. Thank you, Elaine. That's very interesting. Okay, so it's been a fascinating conversation, very interesting insights, and there's a lot more we can talk about, but unfortunately time is running out. So I will have to start wrapping up, and let me start with Axel. What are your takeaways about our topic? How does e-commerce transform today's supply chain? If you can just wrap up in a couple of sentences.
I think from my side, it's really all about change, being ready to change, being ready to adapt. I think, again, as I highlighted earlier, this is a people business. And in my role as in business development, I think we need to engage customers. We need to understand what's happening in the market, and we need to be ready to change as quickly as we possibly can within our framework, obviously. And I think the one who will basically have the right speed to the market will be the company and will be the right player to be successful.
Excellent, excellent takeaway. Elaine, I leave the final word to you. What's your takeaway? What are your thoughts for the future?
Thank you. I think for us here, very humble and very simple. We need to stay very responsive to our customers' needs and at any one time because of the change factor. In fact, if you look at our website, we've changed our vision to be a responsive logistics player. And that's our new branding, by the way. So that's number one. Number two, I think in view of the change, we have to be ready to reconfigure some of the ways we do things. An air freight person might need to look into alternatives, looking at ocean and truck, etc. So we need to reconfigure ourselves to a certain extent. And obviously, the last but not least, some of the takeaways, be resilient. I think we all need to learn, and we all need to accept that the challenges ahead of us and overcome them. So being resilient as part of that. So I would say these are some of the key takeaways, and we'll always be close to our customers and our suppliers. I think it's very key. Thank you.
Elaine, Axel, thank you very much for a very interesting, serious, but very progressive way of thinking about the market, about the customers, about the industry. I wish you all the very best in your developments, in your plans, and moving forward. You are certainly a prime mover in the industry, and I wish you all the very best. I'd like to thank all those who have connected to this webinar today. It's been a very interesting discussion. Thank you for all your questions. Thank you, Ramon, for assisting me in hosting this. And thank you all very much. Take care and stay well. Very best wishes to you.
Same to you. Thank you, John Ramon.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.